Recording.
Good morning, ladies, and welcome to this week's installment of Torah with a Takeaway. This week is Parshas Vayakheil. We know Vayakheil, someone has to mute themselves. We know that Parshas Vayakheil and Pikude are both repetitions, but they enhance greatly Truma and Tetzaveh. And all of these are about building the Mishkan within ourselves. That's really what they talk about. After I did a lot of preparation, I realized at the end there is so much. I found treasure trove of Shabbos information. I'll have to give it another time. I'm just sharing with you my inner problem here that I really wanted to bring this out, but we already had a full share. So I'm only going to touch upon Shabbos, even though it is in there in this week's Parsha. But first, let's talk about what we're going to be talking about is, again, furthering the whole discussion of how to build a Mishkan within ourselves. In this week's Parsha, I mean, in general, this whole Sefer, this is, one of the last Parshias in Sefer Shmos, Parshas Vayakheil. And the Ramban tells us the interesting thing in the beginning of Sefer Shmos. He tells us, I don't know if you remember this way back when from your high school days, but every Sefer in Chumash has like a nickname, so to speak, to it, that the Ramban gives it, because it talks about what's going to be found in the whole Sefer. So according to the Ramban, I'll first read it to you in Hebrew, then we'll paraphrase. Nisyachet Sefer ve'ela shmos be'inyan hagalus uvegeula mimenu. The whole Sefer of Shmos is talking about exile and leaving exile. And he calls it Sefer HaGeula. People are not considered redeemed until they go to the place that they really belong. As long as they were in Mitzrayim, they were still considered in exile. They were in a land that didn't belong to them. They were in the desert. As soon as they came back, came to the Midbar, and then Hashem gave him his Shechina with the Mishkan. Az shavu el mala savosam, az nechshavu geulim. Lachen nishlam hasefer zeh b'shlimo inyan Mishkan v'yos kavod Hashem maleo so tamid. Those are the words of the Ramban, the Heilige Ramban, the beginning of Parshas Shmos. In other words, it's called, this whole Sefer is called Sefer HaGeula. At the end of Sefer Shmos, he calls it Sefer HaGeula. And the reason he says, because Hashem saved us from all of our enemies, and we hope they're not included in Parliament, and and now has brought us to where we belong. And once he brought the Shechina with the Mishkan, then it's called Sefer HaGeula. Rav Box Zatzal, the Rosh Yeshiva from Detroit, Aryeh Box, asked a question, good question, in fact. How can you call Sefer Shmos, Sefer HaGeula, when they're sitting there in a desert? Is that really like your real place? And in fact, if you even talk about stress, for 40 years, they didn't know, are you moving tomorrow? Are you moving in 15 years? When are you going to pick up? You don't have a place to call home. You don't know where you're not anywhere for too long. And the whole it was an empty desert. They didn't have their own anything. They're eating. Their parnasa was not normal. It was not normal in any means. That's what you call the geula. How can we understand such a thing? So he answers by saying that we know that the purpose of the entire creation is for perfection of character. And when Hashem's essence filled the Mishkan and you felt the Shechina, you felt Hashem's presence everywhere, that's already called Geula. Because Geula, says Rav Bakst, is not perfection of this world. It's the perfection within yourself. That's called the Geula. And that's what we're davening for. We're not davening for, let us have our own land and our own trees and our own language and eat falafel all day. We are davening for a final situation where we really feel at peace and we feel like we're doing what we're supposed to do and that Hashem is number one in our lives. Isn't that what the Geula is? When everyone will finally recognize, Bayom Hahu, yeah, Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, when he's going to be the mainstay in our lives. And that did exist, albeit not in its total. Hashem does want ultimately, when Mashiach comes, people are going to be healed from their sicknesses. There won't be poverty. There's a lot of wonderful things to look forward to in this Man HaGeula. However, but even in the desert situation, we didn't have the total physical perfection. That's when we had, so to speak, that's what Ramban calls Sefer HaGeula, because the perfection is when we really feel like Hashem is in the mainstay of our lives and we are at peace with that and nothing else distracts us. I was thinking about what he said, and I just wanted to add a little thing here. So so what was the Geula from Mitzrayim? So, it was Al Geula Seinu V'al Pedus Nafshenu, it says in Haggadah. There's a twofold Geula. One Geula is the Nefesh Geula. Pedus Nafshenu means our souls are now unhindered. And I'm thinking about that. In Mitzrayim, we're talking about tremendous distraction. All that terrible slavery distracted them from their goal. And also the abomination of Mitzrayim, the situation in Mitzrayim where people were really and truly confronted with immorality everywhere and all kinds of things that were totally opposite what Hashem wants from us. And that is, for being redeemed from that is what's called Geula. Sometimes a person cannot have ideal situations, situations in their house. This can be broken, that can be broken. We're waiting for this to be fixed and that to be fixed. But Geula can happen, a personal Geula can happen at any time. And of course, we want Mashiach because then the standards spiritually will be set much higher to the ultimate, and then we'll really be able to finally achieve what we're supposed to do. But although we want Mashiach, we want to try to bring him inside of ourselves before the Messianic age, because first of all, to merit Mashiach, and second of all, if we can bring ourselves to higher levels in our time, we're going to get more credit for it because we're fighting our Yetzer Hara. Whereas the time of Mashiach, the Yetzer Hara, like we know it today, will not exist. Now, showing how this world is a state of imperfection, at least until the Messianic age, and even who knows what means then, but imperfection is part and parcel of Olam Hazeh. And unfortunately, sometimes we confuse our standards. Today I'm always talking about the younger generations, not everyone, but what you kind of see in the younger generations is that people have the standard of perfectionism sometimes, and the way they keep their house and the way everything, it's hard to be perfect in keeping a house and perfect in keeping your midos at the same time. And let's be sure that our midos take first place, because otherwise, the other stuff gets in the way. It just really gets in the way of our true service to Hashem. Rav Pam Zatzal brings down a story in the Gemara about a family called Avtina's family. These were a family of Kohanim who had the tradition of supplying the Mishkan with the Ketores. They would supply the Mishkan with the 11 ingredients that were needed for Ketores. Now, 4 of them are mentioned in the Torah, and they had a top secret that the other 7 ingredients were not, only they knew about, and the exact combination and everything only they knew about. Now, interestingly enough, the family refused to divulge their recipe to anyone. And at one point, Chazal, our great sages in the time of the Mishnah, felt that this has to be broken already. This cannot go on like this. We can't have a family serving for the Beis HaMikdash, the Ketores, the great incense that was brought up on the Mizbeach, on the altar. That should be something that only one family should hoard and not reveal to other people. It's not a healthy way, and it isn't in sync with good midos. So they hired some families in Alexandria to try to replicate the family's secret. And believe it or not, they almost succeeded, but there's one aspect of the Ketores that they weren't able to achieve. There's one of the 11 spices or herbs was supposed to be maleh ashan. It was supposed to bring up, there's the smoke that came from the Mizbeach of the Ketores, the altar from the incense, had to go straight up like a pillar. It was a miracle, but it was also from this Maleh Ashan. It was a certain spot herb, and they could not duplicate it. They couldn't figure it out. They didn't know how to do it. So they had to go back. Once they ran out, they had to go back to this family of Tinas and tell them, please, we're asking you again to bring the ingredients for the Beis Hamikdash. Guess what the family did? They said, well, now that you're coming back to us, we're going to double the price. Unbelievable. And so the Chazal said, why don't you share your recipe? Why are you so guarded with it? Why don't you allow Klal Yisrael to be able to know this recipe? It's for the whole Klal Yisrael. So they said, we have a Masorah that the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed, and we don't want the secret leaking out because it may fall into the hands of people that are idolaters. That's what their answer was. Well, the Maharsha, a very famous commentator who was usually very deep and profound and a lot of hashkafa in his commentary. Not that I know him by heart, but it's brought down here by Rav Paman. I've seen many times the Maharsha is very, very profound and deep and has a lot of messages. He says the family were a bunch of liars. They weren't doing this. Obviously, they weren't doing it for good motives. They didn't want it. They didn't care about it leaking out. They wanted kavod and they wanted the wealth from the Ketoras, and that's why they did this. Now you have to understand that's unbelievable. Think about this for a minute. We picture that, everything is chaste and pure in the Jewish people. We can't imagine anything ever, anybody ever doing anything for the wrong reasons. That would be horrific otherwise. And yet we find, because they were chasing after money, and this is in the Beis Hamikdash for the Mizbeach, for the Ketoras, there was a family that was doing things for the wrong motives, and yet they used it every single day. We learn from this, Ben Azai says about this family, from this incident, we learn, Ein Adam Magia B'muchan L'Chavero, that a man can never touch what's not meant to be his in Parnasa. In other words, here is a family, a bunch of cheaters, not all of them, I don't know. And I don't even know if this is their name. I would hope that the Gemara changed their name if they did such a horrible thing. But in any case, this family was meant to be the ones bringing it. We don't know why. We don't know who. So there can still be sometimes people that have the wrong motives for what they're doing, and they still succeed, And sometimes the people that have the purest motives do not succeed in life. And that's how it's supposed to be. And still, that's how they're supposed to come by their wages. So we see that this world is not the main thing. And there's a lot of people, even in the frum world sometimes. I mean, I don't think it's the majority. I really don't. I think it's a really tiny minority. But even for the holiest vessels in the Beis Hamikdash, there could be things going on that are not so proper. I know I have a story of a family friend of ours, a man that was in real estate, that is in real estate, and he years and years ago, right on the cusp of his getting his license, he's in commercial real estate, and this person came upon a property that the people would. He came upon a tremendous property, a few $1 million worth, and he was able to make a very nice profit on. Problem was he didn't have his license yet. So this Russian person, I don't know if he was Jewish or not, I don't remember. This Russian person offered him, listen, you can use my name and my license, and I'll give you all the profits afterwards, So he trusted this man. He did this whole deal, took him hours and hours of work. And at the end, what happened? The man said, listen, my papers, my name, my profit. He wouldn't share it with this fellow who just was short of getting his license. So he was so upset. The next day in shul, this person's like a very, very outgoing type of person. So you could see on his face how he feels. And he went to shul the next morning, and he was so downtrodden. He was beside himself. So a person in his minyan told him, what's the matter? I could tell something's really bothering you. And he told him the story. He said, I worked so hard, and look what happened to me. And his friend told him, you know what? This man was meant in Shemayim to have this money. For some reason, he was meant to have money, and you weren't. But he had a choice. Either he would get the money lawfully, or he would get the money unlawfully. So now he's a ganef. Now he's a thief. because he stole somebody else's work. And you were not meant to get the money, so you didn't lose anything you were meant to get. And that's what happens sometimes. We think sometimes, oh, if I would only done this, if I would only done that. We are meant to have what we have. The other person is not meant or is meant. Things are beyond us. And it could mean if they're the most despicable person, all they get now on top of the money they were meant to get is an Aveira, which they could have chosen not to get. They could have gotten the money honestly. And instead, now the money came to them dishonestly. That's such a, so in a world like this, and we fight about it, we get upset about it, but this whole world is beyond our control. Even in the holiest places, you can find problems sometimes. We don't even, the world is totally beyond our control. Rav Dessler says something that's phenomenal, really ties in with last week's parsha, but we didn't have a class last week for various reasons. And it says in Parshas Bereshis, Perek Daled, Pasuk Chaf Beis, that there was Ada and Sila were wives of Lemech, and Sila had a child named Tuval Kayin. Tuval Kayin was, it says in the verse, Lo tesh kol choresh nachosha suvarzel. Literally means he was a sharpener of any shape of copper and iron. In other words, Tuval Kayin was the founder, says the pasuk. This world today, we owe anything made out of iron or copper or any type of steel. The beginning spark was Tuval Kayin. He was the first person that developed, the verse tells us, into things that could be used for plowing. Like he realized that metal has a purpose. He figured out things, what to do. Genius thing. We all base so much of civilization on him. We're just standing on the shoulders of our elders. Anything people think so much is so modern today and so much advanced, we're really standing on the shoulders of our elders. There wouldn't be steel and copper that they realized had utilitarian purposes. We wouldn't have anything today. And same thing with so many other things, like all of them. They all found different things, like Hevel, was it? No, it was or whatever. It's another story. But Cain and Hevel were the founder. They decided what to do with sheep and how to foster sheep and reproduce sheep and how to keep them safe. And then we find other things, how to produce crops. All these were done way back when, and just we've been improving on what they began to do for us. But in any case, Rashi seems to say something totally different. It says Tuval Kayin. Tuval lashon tavlin. Tuval is like the word spiced, which means to improve. Hovil, yivul, means to yield something, to improve upon something. What was he improving of Kayin? Tuval umnaso shel Kayin. He was improving Kayin's profession. He says, Tevel v'hiskin umnaso shel Kayin lasos klei zayin l'rotzchem. What he did was provide weapons for murderers. Now that's a big stretch, says Rav Dessler. The verse tells us that he's the first person to implement metal for humanity. All the utilitarian purposes that mankind needs for plowing, etc., all those things in agricultural activities. Without Tuval Kayin, we'd have nothing. But Rashi's accusing him of preparing weapons for murderers. How do we understand that? So, what's his name? So Rav Dessler says the following. He says, anytime people develop this world, which Rav Yisrael Salanter says is like a cheap whistle, a broken whistle. He say you pay a few pennies for it and it doesn't even work, doesn't even blow. You try to make a sound out of it, nothing ever happens. And even in the holiest places, nothing ever happens. And here we're saying that even someone who develops such a precious skill, whenever you develop more olam hazeh and more olam hazeh and more olam hazeh, what you have a potential for, which Rashi is adding on to the verse, is there's now potential for murder. Now we have more ways to murder somebody. Before you had to beat somebody up into a pulp. Now you can have a sword, a dagger to kill somebody. And in fact, Albert Einstein, who developed all the atomic nuclear ideas, what did he end up doing? Without him knowing, the atom bomb was developed that could destroy humankind. I said humankind, not people kind, but any case, or mankind, I should say. Any case, but now, so anything that comes into this world has a potential for destruction, and it has both sides. And because, says Rav Dessler, most people don't work on their character, what we find is the more technology or anything in industry, more things get developed in this world, the more potential there is for disaster. Like I'm looking now at the camera on this computer to be able to see you. But when I had to go purchase a camera, a lot of these cameras feature a cover. This one actually doesn't have a cover, but some of them have security covers. And I asked, what does security cover mean? It protects the lens? They said, oh no, people can hack on your computer and watch you when your camera is off. And we have a computer, brilliant ideas. Look at all the shiurim we can see now. Thank God during Zoom, we had a way to connect with society and humanity and our families. At the same time, how much hate is spread on the internet? How much terrible corruption can a person see? Years ago, I had a son of mine, and I can say it safely now because he's kind of hurry. He's a Talmud Chacham in Lakewood. But when he was in 7th grade, we had an incident in Yesodei HaTorah, a local cheder here, from school at that time. They didn't have any kids with television in his class. One boy in 7th grade slept by his Zayda's house, and the Zayda had a television in the bedroom, and something after midnight, the kid saw something and he told the whole class, and it was a whole uproar in Yesodei HaTorah. I remember in those days. Today, with the technology, a kid can see something at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You don't have to sneak at 12 o'clock at night to see something immoral and horrible. Like you can see 1 o'clock in the afternoon, anything, it's all out there. It's a very dangerous weapon technology, and we have to make sure to use it properly. And this is what, when Mashiach will come, it says, Deas Hashem kamayim liyam mechasim. Everyone's going to know Hashem, and I'm sure the computer is going to be up there in front, being able to, people can see everything anywhere at any time. It's wonderful for kosher things, but it's such a danger. The more technology is developed, the more potential, without midos, lies for corruption. You'd think that something's altruistic, we could only do good with, but there's so many people in the world that don't develop their midos, they don't work on their character, and instead what they develop is something that can destroy the world. That's pretty sad, Rav Yitzchak Saruskin Shlita once said that, he was talking to men in Lakewood, men in yeshiva. He said it used to be after first Seder, people would come home for lunch. They would all be walking in pairs, and they'd still be talking so much about their learning, and you see that beauty. I once took a convert. I wanted to show her in Lakewood. I don't know how successful we were. We saw something. If you go in front of the yeshiva of Lakewood or any of the various Batei Medrash, you go there at, let's say, 1:45. You see thousands of men coming out with Gemaras, and they're all talking about their learning. And it was a real special sight to behold for a woman who can't get into Beis Medrash. You could at least see how the men are so involved with their learning and the beauty of Torah. He said now people had cell phones, and we're talking about flip phones. We're not talking about the modern stuff. With flip phones, people are right away picking up the cell phone. Is there a message for me? Is there something? He said, and we lost some of that fire and that people had for Torah, because it's all been deflected. Like, before we had patience, you didn't have to know everything immediately, because very helpful, the cell phone. If you go into a store, if someone can tell you forgot something, if there's anything to remember or to buy at the store, but people are ignoring their children. You see people pushing strollers. A friend of mine in Yerushalayim once said she wanted to ask, why are people not looking at their children when they push their strollers? She's asking why Haredi women don't look at their children when they push the stroller. We used to all turn around, talk to the baby while we were pushing the child. Now everybody's on their phone everywhere. It's like a huge distraction. It's like a weapon. Handle with care. What are we going to do with it? It could be a big problem for us if we don't use it properly. In the Mesilas Yesharim, there is a chapter on Parshas, which means separating yourself from this world. Now, of course, that's one of the highest levels, but still, it's meant to be read by everybody. Rav Victor Miller says everyone should know about Parshas because there's different levels of everything, and we should be aware of it. So he says, we should know anything in this world is a test for us. And he says, because it's rov chulshas ha'adam v'kirbas dato akol rose. Person has a tendency as a human being, he's weak as far as his control sometimes, and his body is inclined to all the negatives, all the material things. They say that's why people are lazy, because laziness is heaviness, and the body is heavy. It keeps us away from spirituality. And it says, as much as you can run away from things, you should. Now, people say we're being tested in this world. Should we run away from tests? Rav Victor Miller once said, if you can run away, run away. He said he knew a case of a woman who the Italian next door neighbor was eyeing her, a married woman. He told the husband and wife, leave immediately, get on the next plane, go somewhere and go buy a house there. Don't even wait 5 more minutes. He told them, sometimes we have to know certain things are tests for us, and we have to know how to I think it's a very big deal to figure out how to employ the cell phone, that it won't be taking us over. Now, some people need it more than others. People are housebound, whatever. There's a need for these things, and it's helpful, but we have to make sure if it's being used purely or not. What comes first, shacharis or checking our messages? We're supposed to have, when you go to sleep at night, when you wake up, Hashem echad, that's what we're supposed to think about. When we get up first in the morning, davening, even though we're women and we have some excuses, but they're not, the halachas are, it's not so simple that you can do other things before davening. Not so simple. Very few things can be done before davening. Hashem should be first in our life. When we go to bed at night, the last thing shouldn't be whatever it is from the phone. It should be Hashem should be the last thing. And I would say Kriya Shema to say, and we have Mincha in the middle to remind us, even in the middle of the day when we're very distracted, to not forget about Hashem. Now, we find that it's a big problem that we have to contend with at all times. Now, even though a lot of this is, the world is not the main thing, and it can be dangerous. This world has a lot of temptations, and our body is used to doing something. Sometimes one thing in this week's parsha that we find that had to be worked on was the power of patience. Patience is so important that it delayed the building of the Mishkan. The work began on the Mishkan after Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the second set of the 10 Commandments on Yom Kippur. Right after Yom Kippur, they started building the Mishkan. Hopefully that would be a way we could perceive Hashem now that we are not on this high level anymore after the sin of the golden calf. Midrashim says that it should have been finished by Teves. It should have been up a few months later, but it wasn't. It wasn't up until it took 3 months. Well, it coincided with the birth of Yitzchak and Nisan. The reason why we had to wait 3 months, though, says the Be'er Yosef, that the sin of the golden calf was basically the Jews lost patience. They didn't have patience to wait for Moshe Rabbeinu, and they thought it was over. And most of them, it was not idolatry. It was, if anything, an idea of having some kind of representation that they could see and touch. But in any case, there was still a lack of patience. They wanted it immediately now, and Aaron tried to hold them back, and he wasn't successful. But the point is that the way to atone for their lack of patience is to wait 3 months for the building of the Mishkan. They can't just have it right away, because that had to be corrected. Another thing with the cell phone and the technology we have today is everything is immediate gratification. This was about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. They had to change schedules in many girls' high schools in the world. I remember years ago when I taught in the high school, there was periods were about 50 minutes to an hour. Now periods are 45 minutes. Because probably technology. Why is it that most kids don't have patience? What, all of a sudden patience is not something out there? People are used to right away. I want to find something right away. You can find information. It's very hard in learning Torah, because for learning Torah, the effort is what counts. In preparing for guests and achnasas orchim and things like that, the work is what counts. And this whole idea of the ease of technology is taking away the mitzvah from us of effort. We don't have so much effort for anything, and people don't have patience. I heard from two sources. I once spoke with someone who was the head of, I think it was Aish in Pittsburgh. And they said that they'd go to college campuses for the youth, and they used to have a speaker and people would be interested and come. He said, nobody wants to sit through a whole thing, or they're on their phone half the time. They have to have that phone in their hand, you know? I like to sing with a bunch of ladies. We sometimes sing for the Sunshine Club, and anybody over the age of, let's say, 50 puts her cell phone down, and anyone under the age of 50 is what I noticed, can't let go of the cell phone while they're even practicing. Not that it's on or whatever. It's like you have to hold it. Like it's like, what is ruling over what, you know? And also somebody told me, I think there was this man named Jeff Seidel who runs a whole Kiruv group in Israel. I think he has a hostel there or something. And he said that people like are not, he said he used to have people, he would take them to Auschwitz and places like that, and people would be crying. And then he would say, okay, you want to learn about Torah? Do you want to be introduced to, you know, Judaism? They would be willing and able, you know, to do so. He says now he has a speech, even by Auschwitz, everybody's got the cell phones on. And not even, and we have, people have a bad habit too. Like Rev. Victor Miller said this in his day when there was no cell phone. He said people go to places, I say, let's say like Niagara Falls, before they even stand there and let the place have an impact upon them, what they're beholding, people have to snap a picture. Like we're not allowing ourselves to, any beautiful scene, we should first let the senses take over and see, wow, Hashem, what have you created? Instead, we have this immediate urge, got to capture the moment. And then we lose the whole thing we're seeing. It's not, and we all know that even on film or even on a computer, you can't capture anything the way it feels when you're standing there. It's such a chaval, it's such a loss that instead of being, you know, and being inspired and letting it, you know, come over you, we're immediately you just transfer it for the memories. We're always thinking ahead, you know, and we're not letting the moment seize the moment and do what we're supposed to do at that particular time. So it really takes away from our zahirus, from being from letting something and having patience, even when we have the cell phone and we have these kind of technology, everything at the push of a button, and we're not able to let it really inspire us like it should. And really, one of the perfections necessary to make the Mishkan was we had to wait. That's the only way we can have a Mishkan. It can only be acquired by patience. Patience, that virtue of patience. We can only keep Shabbos by patience. That's, you know, like you're going to have patience through Shabbos. You know, it's a beautiful trait, and the Heilige Shabbos allows us to acquire that trait. So to have a Mishkan, your inner feelings are what are important. It's not just what you do and accomplish. And we're also in the whole surroundings, the environment we're in our generation is, what do you do? What do you accomplish? But we're into, what is your inner self? How do you express yourself as a person? We find that the Chavetz Chaim says that every one of the Nesiim were enumerated. You know, even though their sacrifices were identical, the Torah spends so many words on each person because each one had different personal intentions. It's what's inside of you that counts, that we should be patient and we shouldn't come to anger, and all the good traits, not jealousy and all these things. That's what we're here to work upon. That's our geula, and it'll free us from all these horrible traits. You know, it just reminds me, throwing this in right now, years ago, I said that one of my personal redemptions was when I was young and stupid, before I had children, you know, you wanted to have a perfect looking house. And of course, we should try to have a very clean house if we can, if we have the ability, if we have everything. And I always try to have everything nice and clean. And one Rebbitzin in Detroit told me once a very good thing. She says, she tells younger women, only clean up at the end of the day when your husband's coming home. Like, why bother? If they have little children, in 5 minutes, it's going to look just like it looked now. At the end of the day, you bother when your husband comes home, and then let it go until the next time your husband comes home. But in any case, of course, you have to know where to find things. You have to be organized. You have to be organized, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be picture perfect. One time, my kids had just wreaked havoc. I don't know what they did. I forgot what it was. It was so long ago, but they just, I don't know. It was like a friend was coming over, and let's say within like 8 minutes before the person was supposed to walk through the door, they did this horrible something that the whole house there was a big mess somewhere. I don't remember details. Anyways, I remember that, at first I was mortified, thinking someone's going to come into my house in such a condition. But then once it happened, it was such a geula that I saw, you know what? If somebody really likes you, they don't care. We all have the first time a friend's going to come, you have this thing. Once they're your friend, you lower your standards. Like, you don't have to be a certain way. If they're really your friend, you don't have to present a certain way. We don't have to make that impression, So so it's your inner self, your inner world that matters, not your outer world. Similarly, Rav Chaim Mintz from Ura and from also the Mashgiach of Staten Island Yeshiva, he brings down a malbim in this week's parsha when it says, "Vayavo kol ish asher naso libo." Every person whose heart was raised, and kol asher nadvarucha, and whoever felt like being generous, all those people, oso hereo, those people, Hashem showed them how to construct the things in the Mishkan. There's no amounts mentioned in this week's parsha of how much each person brought, because if somebody would bring with their whole heart and they had no money, it'd be considered equivalent to a wealthy person. I just learned 3 years ago, someone in my shir taught me that the kosel was supposedly well known, and I did look up, there were sources for it, that the kosel that was built in Shlomo Melech's time, that we have a promise in Shir Hashirim, the kosel will never be destroyed. The kosel was all amounts brought by the poor. The kosel was contributed by the poor, and that's why it never was destroyed, because they gave it with their whole hearts. So practically speaking, we look at results, but if we want something very, very much, it says kol asher naso libo, whoever felt like contributing, that's what was counting by Hashem, is your innermost thoughts. And but they have to be pure. Rav Shalom Gansfreud, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, who wrote the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, he also wrote a sefer called Apirion. I saw this in the Lekach Tov. It says, Sheishes Yamim Te'aseh Malacha. This week's Parsha. 6 days work should be done. It's like you're not the direct doer of it. It's an indirect verb. Why is this work should be done? Because it meant to say, if Shabbos Hashem Elokecha, like if you feel like Hashem is controlling your world, you're going to have a better, more meaningful Shabbos. But if you feel like you're in control, then Shabbos won't be too much to you. Now, even if somebody doesn't have the pure kavanas, even if they don't have pure kavanas, it will be rewarded. You may not see it in this world. Like we said here, these people from the family of Tinas didn't have the right kavanas, and yet the Beis Hamikdash had the Ketoras from them. A person is always rewarded eventually for their good kavanas. There was a man named Hur who died trying to stop the Jewish people from doing the Egel. You'd think doesn't mean much, but who's chosen to construct everything in the Mishkan? His grandson, Betzalel, who was 13 years old at the time, was the one in charge of doing the Mishkan. Why? Because Hur gave up his life for Hashem. So in his progeny, he was later rewarded that he should be the one meriting to do the base, the Mishkan. And it was, Chavetz Chaim says, in this world, we're often confounded. We walk, it's like he gives a mashal. You must have heard this famous mashal. You must have heard this. A man goes into a shul, a villager goes into a shul in a big city, and he sees everybody in the back row is getting an aliyah. He says, what kind? He goes up to the gabbai and he says, what kind of shul is this? You only reward people in the back row? And he said, Rabbi Yid, understand something. He says, you just got here. He said, this week it's somebody's bar mitzvah, and all these people in the back row are his relatives. They're his whole family getting called up. He said, you're only here for a short time. You don't understand the workings of Hashem. Sometimes kavanah is rewarded decades, centuries later. We don't understand why things have to happen. But Bezalel, a young man of 13, is the one that the whole Mishkan came from because of the Mesiras Nefesh, the kavanah of his grandfather. Rav Scheinberg explains that Zatzal explains that in this week's parsha of how Midos affected the Mishkan, we find it with the Nesiim, with the princes of each tribe. They brought the most precious things in the Beis Hamikdash, the Avnei Shoham. They were precious jewels that fell with the man for them. So obviously Hashem wanted them to do something with it. They contributed it, and it was on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, right? Now, what they said was, everyone, you bring whatever needs to be brought for the Mishkan. We will fill in all the blanks. That's so noble. Rav Yaakov Galinsky Zatzal says this is a Mashiach's dream. If a rich person would tell him, I'll give you everything you need at the end. Whatever that needs to be replaced, that's not yet, that you didn't yet gain, I'm going to fill in all the gaps. That's wonderful. However, they're taken to task. It's missing a yud because they were told that they did it with laziness. They should have given it first and also add, we'll fill in the blanks. To say we'll do last is like, you didn't want to be the first people to do something. There's missing something. The Ramchal says that Zrizas, having alacrity, Zahirus is being patient, and having alacrity is a shleimus gedola, is a great sign of completion, of perfection. When a person decides that they are going to do something with haste, it says all the actions of tzaddikim are always with zrizas. They're always with immediate, let's run and do it before we lose the opportunity, because this opportunity will never come again. We'll never have enough when we daven, but to try to seize the moment, not wait till later in the day, because that time of the day may not come. When we have to learn about zrizas, we have to learn about doing things with an energy. Who do we learn it from? The ants. And now not A-U-N-T, but A-N-T. The ants have this capacity. They carry so much on their backs, and they only live usually 6 months. They need only a stalk and a half to live in their lifetimes, but they end up transplanting much more than that, because what does the ant say to itself? Chaim Shmulevitz says, it says to itself, who knows if I'll live longer? I have to make sure I have enough. Chaim Shmulevitz says that the philosophy of Zrizas is putting importance on something. And he says that it's not a question of, everybody really is not lazy for everything. I remember years ago when I used to go to seminary, I went to seminary in New York. I would take the train. I don't know how many Jews in New York take the train anymore. I guess they still do, but it's not, especially during COVID. I don't know what the story is in New York, but when they would take the train, when I take the train, I would see people reading, but the stuff they were reading was not clean. People don't like to waste their time. But the question is, what do they do with their time? Everyone has to find something to do. Unfortunately, some will spend it drinking, some will spend, but everyone's got to do something, because the idea of laziness is not that you do nothing. The idea of laziness is, what is important to you? Where do you put your energies? What do you consider that you want to work with? What's important for you to succeed? So this is also problematic with computers that we have today. Computers keep us sitting. And who's this? We're supposed to be sitting. Sometimes we have to be doing it. It's a lot. It could be a passive activity. Even shiurim. For a man, he has a mitzvah to learn. But even shiurim are not great for a man necessarily. He's got to sweat and toil and learn Torah himself, and he gets reward for the effort. For a woman, we have to be doing. We need the inspiration of a shiur, but we need the doing afterwards. We need to get up and call the people that are lonely. And we need to get up and we need to do stucco work. We need this many things we can do. And even if people are tired and whatever they are, people have to realize life has a purpose and game is over. At some point, we have to achieve as much as we can while the fire is still burning. Rav Bach says the only way to succeed is to set the bar high. Now, why are we told in the Medrash that man was born knowing the entire Torah in the womb? Because we have to know that we have that potential of knowing the whole Torah. We have that, but it's in our genetic makeup. It's there. We can do everything. We can accomplish everything. Shraga Feivel Mendelovitz used to say, he says that if you don't look at the stars, you'll fall in the mud. You have to aim high. In this week's Parsha, Chavetz Chaim brings down wrong Parsha, 1 second. Chavetz Chaim brings down, it says, Vayikra Moshe el Betzalel ve'el Eliyahu v'chol ish chacham lev asher nasan Hashem chachma libo. It says that Hashem went to Betzalel and Eliyahu and everyone that Hashem gave chachma, kol asher naso libo lekirva el malacha asososa. Anyone who heart raised them up to come close to the work that they had to do. Now he says, the Chavetz Chaim, notice in the groups it says he called Betzalel, he called the Eliyahu, he called the people wise of heart, which we'll speak about in a moment. And anyone whose heart was inspired to get close to the malacha. Now, it didn't say vechol, it says all that were inspired to do the malacha. So the Chavetz Chaim says that seems to imply that anybody that ended up donating to the Mishkan had a common denominator. They were naso libo. They decided, even though the thing seemed unbelievably difficult, they all decided they were going to do it anyways. Now, this was an unbelievable action. Today, we could never do such a thing of getting a shul and telling somebody, you feel like doing it, do it. No, of course, today we have artisans. But in the time of the Midbar, there was nobody that was an artisan. So Moshe was told to make the menorah. He didn't even know how to do it. He never touched gold, soft gold in his life, that he had to fashion it. And Betzalel had no idea, no inkling. But if you feel you can try, that will allow you. These were the people chosen to make things for the Mishkan, because we have to try. Even though it may look like it's too much, we should always start a mitzvah. Even if we don't know how we're going to finish it, that's not our point. The point is to do it. We're supposed to try to go for high places. Yeah, and Hashem told Moshe, you can do the Mishkan all by yourself. Now, the Bitachon Hotline says something that's very comforting. He says, let's say some ladies called him up and they said their husbands were not such learned people and they were very despondent that they didn't merit to marry somebody who was a learner. They felt bad. They worked so hard to husband to go learn, and they see he's not such a learner. He's not so into it. So Bitachon Hotline says, if you try your best and you're doing it in order your husband should learn, you get the reward as if you're married to such a person. Even if he doesn't do his part, that's the Nevardik Hashkafa. You did yours. It's you try as if you try your utmost to do what you could do. That is like you did it. It's as if you did it. Machshava taiva kamaisa. Person has to set high goals for himself. Rav Chaim Stein Zatzal, Rosh Yeshiva of Telz in Cleveland, once said that he told all of his students that anyone that ever learned in our yeshiva should make up, no matter what my situation will be in life, I will always learn an hour a day, no matter what. Because if you make some kind of goal for yourself, you set goals that you're going to do something, your life is not going to be just meaningless. You're going to make your life count. You're going to make Hashem number one in your life. If you're going to do that, then you will find that then that's how it's going to go eventually. We find there was a story once where Chaim Kanievsky Shlita was once overheard right before when they made a l'chaim with Mechutin. And then he said something to his wife. He says, now I have to pay my chayvus. So the Mechutin got a little bit worried. Like, what do you mean? We just made a shidduch, and he says he has chayvus, he has debts. I have to pay my debts. Like, what's going on? He got worried and he inquired and he found out Rav Chaim Kanievsky has debts that he pays every day in his learning. He has to learn this amount of Chumash, this amount of Gemara, this amount of, And then every year he completes everything, the Bavli, Yerushalmi, Shulchan Aruch, everything all year because of his chayvus. He set his goals high, has things he wants to accomplish. Now, I know this is mid-year, but we're all in a mid-year slump now, at least in Toronto with the weather and other things that are going on here in Canada, which I will not mention. But we have all these things going on in our lives right now. We have to remember, where were our commitments Yom Kippur? And the commitments are, what are we going to do? Not what we're hoping toward, not just, let's implement things that we're going to make things happen. We're going to make things change. We're going to make some changes in our lives. That's what we have to have in mind. The Mishnah Berurah, the Chavetz Chaim, when he was writing the Mishnah Berurah, he had a personal tragedy right in the middle. And it could have knocked anybody down. I think a child was lost, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe a son-in-law. I know his son-in-law was nifter in his lifetime, but I think also his son was nifter. Not sure. But in any case, he assembled 3 men. He says, you're going to be like a beis din. I want to tell you, I'm not going to let anything stop me to complete writing the Mishnah Berurah. That's how much he felt. What ruins us, though, is when we say, what am I? What can I accomplish? You know, it says, Rav Box brings down, I don't know where this is found. Okay, because it says this so lipo. We're supposed to feel, I can do it. I can be a greater person. I'm not just an animal with a head on top. He just says, it says in the I can't read my writing, but I don't know where the source is, but it says from Chazal, ha'ochel b'shuk pasal le'edus v'doma lekelev. A person who eats while they're walking is like a dog, and he's pasal le'edus. That means he can't give testimony under a chuppah. He can't give edus. Why? So Rav Box brings down, the Rashi says, shalom makpid al kavodo. He's not makpid about his honor. If you just eat like an animal while you're walking, I asked Rabbi Lo, he says, today we can drink while we're walking. Even that, I'm sure, is not the best. It's so bad when people walk around while they're eating. It shows like you don't feel you have a higher calling. If you act like that, you can't give testimony. Why? Because if you're not makpid on being a noble person, then you're not going to be careful how you give testimony. We have to think about how, our greatness should inspire us to work on our traits. We have to become better people. I'll just say this in short. We find that the kior of the Mishkan, the kior was the laver, I don't know what you call it. It was a copper vessel that was made for the Kohanim to wash their hands and feet before they would serve in the temple. What was the kior made of? It was made out of maros hatzovos, made out of copper mirrors that women used in Egypt to attract their husbands. So Moshe Rabbeinu, when he saw this to make the kior, he was very astounded. He said, Hashem, this is what you want? You want the kior? That's such a lowly purpose? And Hashem says, yes, I do. And you know why? Because the women, very interestingly, when it came to serving the golden calf in last week's Parsha, the women did not want to give them their jewelry. And yet, when it came to giving to the Mishkan, it says, Vayavo hanashim al hanashim. The men had to come after the women. The women were the first people to come to donate to the Mishkan. So if you're going to say women don't like their jewelry, why were they the first ones to give for the Mishkan? And if you're going to say women, if you're going to say they're giving to the Mishkan, so it sounds like they don't like their jewelry. When it came to the golden calf, the Egel Azav, they refused to give from their jewelry. This means, says Rav Mordechai Miller from Gateshead, these were women that refused, that worked on their character. That means, what were the whole purpose of the mirrors? They said their husbands were giving up in Mitzrayim. Why should we have children? Who needs more children? They're all going to die anyways from Paro. So the woman says, we can't give up. The women encourage their husbands, saying, we can't give up. Women have a midah. I read from the Biala Rebbe. I don't know if he's still alive. I don't know whether to say whatever. I don't know if he's still alive, but from Switzerland, he wrote a sefer about women. And in it, he said, women have a tendency to want to, they always want something new, a little bit new clothes, like for Yontif, mitzvah to buy your wife new clothes, new jewelry. Why do we want something, a little bit new? It doesn't have to be a major thing, a little thing, because women are like the moon. We keep refreshing us. And we got Rosh Chodesh, and the men lost it because the refreshingness means to be able to control yourself. That's perfection of character. And the women had more of a potential than the men did. And the refreshing, women give birth, they bring newness to the world, they refresh themselves. That's why women were rewarded with Rosh Chodesh. And it's not a bad thing that people want to look a little nice sometimes. It's an idea of, seeing the beauty in the world, using the beauty in the world for the proper reasons, of course. So going against your personality is what we're here in the world to do. And how technology keeps us away from it, we have to be aware of. Remember, this is Sefer HaGeula. Let's all find the personal Geula we can find within ourselves. Let's remember the danger of nature. How nature can suck us in. And by nature, people are lazy because our body is heavy. And by nature, we find that we tend to be impatient and not think about perfection. But shleimus is shleimus gedola. Remember, we said is zrizas, and also being patient and being having alacrity and doing things as quick as we can and not wasting our lives, and having the right thoughts. Like, look how they had the right thoughts. People had the right thoughts were the ones rewarded. And that's how the whole Mishkan, the whole Beis HaMikdash was built. The whole Kosel HaMaravi was built with kavana, even of the poor. And but now it doesn't always come so easily. Sometimes it has to come in stages. We can't just we have to do practical introspection and think, what can we really do to change that will really, really and truly work? There's a story I read in the Zera Shimshon by Rabbi Zalman Seltzer, Nachman Seltzer rather, and he says that he told the story of a couple he met a cab driver rather, and the cab driver says, I became a Shomer Shabbat. And he said, really? How did you do it? He said, it was very interesting. I always wanted to be a Shomer Shabbat, but my wife and I are heavy smokers, and we just couldn't give it up, so we just couldn't do it. So he said one time he was at a stop at a intersection in Israel. The light turned red, and all of a sudden somebody from Breslov threw into his car a pamphlet, and he just decided he had a minute. He opened it up, and in the pamphlet it says, if somebody smokes 18 cigarettes, if he only smokes 17, it's already by Hashem something improved. So he got very encouraged by this. So what did he do? He told his wife that Friday he came home from work. He says he went to take a shower. His wife says, "Why are you taking a shower so early in the day?" He says, I'm gonna go to Beit Knesset. I'm gonna keep Shabbat. So what he told his wife is, listen, I'll make kiddush. I went to shul. I'll make kiddush. We're not gonna smoke for an hour. So they bought extra garinim that weekend, extra sunflower seeds and all kinds of nash. And he and his wife, he bought a lot of newspapers. And they're sitting and reading the newspaper, and they're reading the newspaper, and it's an hour. And he says, you know what? I'm enjoying what I'm reading. Let's do another hour. They did another hour. It's soon getting dark. He said, you know what? I think I can keep it tonight. And he said, I went to sleep at a time. I haven't gone to sleep since I'm 10 years old. Friday night. But he said, you know what? Maybe this way I'll at least Friday night, I won't smoke a cigarette. So he went to sleep very early. The next morning, he sleeps in late. He says, you know what? It's going. I've already kept 10 hours of Shabbat. Look at this, 12 hours. 14 hours, whatever it was at that point. So he and his wife, they had lots of newspapers. I don't know if he went to shul in the morning, but they just were reading it. And he said, one more hour here, one more hour there. At the end, they kept the whole Shabbat. So from then on, he became a total Shomer Shabbat. And later, he even incorporated all the other things he had to do for Shabbos. But the fact was, if we do it one step at a time, just what are we lacking? Can we increase something? And Rav Nassim Bachvogel Zatzal says, do something positive, not negative. Don't say I won't, say I will. I will do this first in my day. Or I will, if you say I won't, you're leaving a vacuum and you're going to end up, you won't be able to keep it. But if you say I will, I will do this. I'll read. If I have a problem with anger, I'm going to learn Sfarim on anger. If I have a problem with Shmir Salashon, I'm going to learn something on a constant basis of Shmir Salashon. Whatever I need to do something in a positive way, and will really bring the Geula, hopefully the real one. Yes, Hashem, soon in our days. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Elisheva Shields, for your amazing monitoring. And thank you all for being here. And hope to see you, Mitzvah Hashem. Oh, next week, we will be starting Megillas Esther with Reb Brevda's version from the Vilna Gaon. You must hear it. It's a must hear. It's going to change your life. Thank you for listening.
Beautiful, very nice. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Can I just say something about
Yes,
wasting
please.
time, Rebbetzin?